microphone.
I'm a PhD student from the University of Tokyo, and today I'm going to talk about the contested legitimacy of environmental NGOs. This is from the anti-wave campaign. My presentation is divided into 7 parts. I made some modifications yesterday, but I haven't printed out in the handout. So you can refer to the slides. We find some differences in the order of the slides. Firstly, I want to talk about the background of my research. So, as you may know, the whaling problem has long been a global environmental issue. The IWC, the International Whaling Commission, is a global body charged with the conservation of whales and management of whaling. It was established in 1948 and by the terms of International Convention for Regulation of Whaling. In 1982, the IWC has adopted a moratorium on the commercial whaling, which has stopped the commercial whaling. However, although the IWC is successful in establishing an international management of whales, it is now divided into 2 blocks, the pro-whaling block and the anti-whaling block. Between them, there is a impasse in their negotiations. The main whaling countries, as you know, Japan, Norway, and Iceland, believe that the moratorium is just temporary and should be abandoned someday. And besides these whaling countries, some other countries which do not hunt whales also support whaling. In these years, the pro-whaling forces are rising within the IWC, as you can see from the chart. The change of the number of pro-whaling and anti-whaling countries in the IWC from 1948 from 2018. The blue bar shows the pro-whaling countries. So among whaling countries, Japan has received the most international criticism and becomes the main target of the NGOs movement. And because they hunt much in scale and there is no international monitor, and they hunt whales in the Antarctic estuary. And Japan has exploited the exception of ICRW to continue whaling in the name of scientific research for aboriginal subsistence. Japan joined IWC in 1951 and stopped commercial whaling in accordance with the moratorium in 1985. But it doesn't stop lobbying in the IWC for resumption of commercial whaling. In 1987, Japan began the so-called scientific research whaling in the Antarctic Ocean. The Japanese government announced its plan to withdraw from the IWC in the last year and eventually quitted the IWC in July 2019. It means that Japan is no longer subject to the regulation of IWC and can restart its commercial whaling in its territorial waters and the EEZ, but it cannot harvest whales in the Antarctic Ocean anymore. The moratorium is widely regarded as the outcome of a widespread anti-whaling movement led by the environmental NGOs like Greenpeace. As a result, whale conservation becomes a global norm and a paradigm of a successful international regime. And what is the environmental NGOs? They are specialized in addressing environmental issues that have global consequences such as global warming, ozone depletion, deforestation, and biodiversity loss, and so on. The anti-whaling NGOs use many strategies in their campaign, such as the direct actions, persuasive approaches, and information politics. Here is my puzzle. Since the late 1990s, the NGOs gradually lost their grounds in the anti-whaling campaign. They failed to find a way out of the stalemate in the IWC negotiation, especially in the mid-1990s from to present, there is a non-contestation in the IWC. Also, in Japan, NGOs did not make any impact on policy making or gained some public support. The Japanese government responds to the anti-whaling movement with the counter-movement of anti-whaling movement. So why did NGOs fail in the anti-whaling movement since the late 1990s? The purpose of my research is to explain the failure of the anti-whaling campaign by applying a perspective of the legitimacy of the NGO and the NGO community. Aside finding the current literature, the whale problem has been addressed in perspectives of power, interest, knowledge, and norms, but few have focused on the role of non-state actors in whaling policy making and governance. From the current literature, I find that the global environmental governance features complicated issue areas, scientific uncertainty, and multiple actors involved. These characteristics leave space and opportunity for non-state actors, especially NGOs, to participate in global governance. NGOs are widely recognized as having achieved success in advocating for global environmental issues. The most famous is the ozone depletion and deforestation. However, there has been a rising call for an elaborate legitimacy agenda for NGOs. If NGOs' legitimacy is questioned, they will lose public distrust and their positions in global governance. Such men defined legitimacy as a generalized perception or assumption that the actions of an entity are desirable, proper, or appropriate within some socially constructed system of norms, values, beliefs, and definitions. So in my opinion, the legitimacy of NGOs is in the process of building, maintaining, and demonstrating the image that they are desirable, proper, and appropriate in this constructed system. So why NGOs' legitimacy is in question? NGOs have legitimacy that is derived from the failing legitimacy of states, especially in global environmental governance, where states often lack capacity and political will to promote international agreements. NGOs are often vulnerable to the controversy of legitimacy because of their non-state character and non-traditional role in international relations. It is because NGOs' pursuit of values and morality makes them prone to the controversy of legitimacy, but value and morality are largely constructed by the social historical context that differs from state to state. So I employ a framework of analysis by adding some relational factors by considering individual NGO within the NGO community and translating legitimacy of NGOs into relationship between their multiple audiences. There are some types of legitimacy contested in the anti-bullying campaign that I will talk about next. The moral legitimacy, regulative legitimacy, cognitive legitimacy, and pragmatic legitimacy. And there are some factors why these types of legitimacy are contested. And the first is when cognitive legitimacy is contested. We can see in the anti-bullying campaign there is scientific ambiguity and controversy. The moratorium at first was created for the better management and recovery of the whale stocks after unrestrained hunting since the 1960s, but it is still controversial. The current concrete population of whales and the stocks of certain species. Since the 1990s, new scientific evidence has emerged which suggests that cautious hunting of whales under the management will not make some species of them endangered. So the norm contestation that happens in the IWC is the conservation that is to say the total ban of whaling versus the protection norm, which means sustainable exploitation of resources is acceptable. The second factor is political sensitivity and cultural relativism. Although the whaling industry is shrinking and there are not much economic benefits, it is still of much political sensitivity to the whaling countries like Japan. Anti-whaling NGOs have proved ineffective in altering domestic policy and the diplomacy of Japan. The national diet of Japan heavily depends on fish and other marine creatures, and also the fishery industry is the mainstay of Japanese economy, as you know. The Japanese government worries that a total ban of whale hunt will make the anti-whaling bloc move to other fish and that are endangered species, such as bluefin tuna. This will also threaten food security and the economic stability of Japan. Since the 1990s, the Japanese government started to assert that whaling is a traditional activity which is relevant to its national sentiment. These things that large northern-based NGOs are the allies of Western anti-whaling countries. So their activities are interpreted by the Japanese government as an imposition of Western values. The third factor is the absence of beneficiaries. Cake and shipping offer two kinds of issues that are most likely to lead to successful transnational advocacy networks. The first one is issues involving physical harm to vulnerable people, and the second one is issues involving legal equality of opportunity. But in the anti-whaling campaigns, it is unclear who are the beneficiaries. This campaign lacks clear and direct linkage or causal story between who bears the responsibility and who are the victims. So NGOs fight against whaling countries and whaling practices, but who do they fight for? Since the late 1990s, pro-whaling countries began to justify their willing practices by linking to Aboriginal rights and cultural imperialism. Many developing countries in the IWC have therefore switched their positions to support willing. As the last one is the less unity in NGO community, which threatens the regulative and pragmatic legitimacy of the NGOs. And firstly, is that there is difference in way of thinking. In the 1990s, some NGOs changed their position on willing. This led to less unity in NGO community and weakens the anti-willing norm. Some animal rights organizations think whales are special as marine mammals and they are equal to human beings, thus they oppose any form of whaling. Some NGOs only support the Aboriginal subsistence whaling, which causes minimum pain to whales. And some others require the precautionary principle in whaling and arguing international regulation, monitor, and scientific verification. And secondly, their strategies are very different. According to the different ways of thinking, they take different strategies. Some NGOs mainly take the conventional strategy like information politics and advocacy and lobby. And some radical environmental activists, notably the sea shepherds, who prefer confrontational tactics and is often accused of eco-terrorists by the pro-whaling side. So the consequences of this less unity in NGO communities that NGOs with different demands are not likely to make coordinated efforts to make their campaign more effective, and the public hardly recognize their claim in anti-whaling campaigns and easily believe in the negative and the radical image of these NGOs which the media and the politicians made of it. And in 2008, 2 activists of Greenpeace Japan were arrested for stealing whale meat. This event was widely publicized by Japanese and foreign media and seriously undermines the reputation of Greenpeace Japan. So, to conclude my presentation, as the failure of environmental NGOs in the anti-whaling campaign can be explained from a perspective of contested moral, regulative, connective, pragmatic legitimacy. NGO strategy should take into consideration the socio-political context where they operate. And it is also challenging for NGOs to keep a balance between direct action and conventional advocacy. If NGOs include violations of domestic and international law in their campaigns, they are likely to generate public distrust and resistance, like the Greenpeace arrest. In the context of global governance, NGOs are closely linked to each other and they rise and fall together as a whole in the eyes of their audiences. And the future work is to elaborate on more countries' positions on whaling and the NGOs' influence. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'd like to ask again Professor Shida Sensei to have a comment.
Thank you very much for informative presentation. I just want to ask one very simple question, since this theme I'm quite ignorant. The NGOs campaign against whales, hunting whales. I just wondered that even the tuna fish is dangerous because which is very polluted by mercury or heavy metals. So pregnant ladies should not eat more than once a week tuna, even tuna. So whales is more dangerous than tuna. So because the whale is more bigger fish, and the contamination, concentration of the mercury or other chemicals is so serious. So the way of persuading Japanese, the ordinary people, might be the case that one should not eat whales, not because this is very savageous or anti-animal feeling, but the eating whales is more dangerous. These kind of arguments cannot be heard in Japan at all, at least as far as I know. And the way of persuading the people is, as you said, that not only strategical, but as a way of the persuasion was quite in the long direction in Japan so far, I noticed. Did you know such kind of information about these kinds of scientific information or provocation against eating the whales in terms of the pollution or in terms of the concentration of the heavy metals?
Can I correct any other question or comment?
Yeah, thank you for your interesting presentation. If I understood correctly, you are mostly, the question is developing from international relations, and you're answering it by employing NGOs, but under an international relations paradigm. So what I was wondering is whether you've considered looking into protest research, where there's been a lot written about NGOs and NGO behavior, and that may inform some of your questions and answers in that field. For example, to the question just posed, why there's not a different strategy being used by NGOs in order to delegitimize whale eating. There is a lot of work on this in protest research. And also, for example, yourself mentioned that in your conclusion that the Japanese society is less tolerant of radical protests, and so activists should alter their strategy here. So there is a huge debate about the effectiveness of radical tactics versus non-radical tactics, and what actually constitutes radicalism or not. Whether Greenpeace would actually be considered radical or not, this would be something you could very nicely derive from protest movement research.
Any other comment or question? Can you reply?
Thank you for the questions. The first question is that if I know some scientific information about the dangerous whale meat, actually it is dangerous, but in the reports of the Japanese media, they just hide this information for the public. They just encourage them to save these traditional practices and in the media, I think it is less known the blue tuna, but because the whale is a symbol of the environmental campaigns from the last century, so it is much more known to the public. But the public doesn't know the dangerous dimension of these animals. They just think they are clever mammals in the sea. So at present, there are only few people still eating the whale meat. So what is the problem is not whether we eat or not eat this whale meat, but it's a political interest behind the problem. This is also the problem inside IWC. It's not the economic benefits that makes sense, but the political benefits and the diplomatic strategies that is important and sensitive to Japanese government. The second question is I have considered some sociology methodology to do my research. So as you see, the protest and the strategies between different NGOs. But this is just starting point my PhD thesis, so I think I should learn more about this methodology. And also the debate about the radical and the not radical. And it is true that the Japanese society is less tolerant of these radical activists, and the Greenpeace has transformed their strategies and to be more conservative and conventional. But I think the strength of NGOs lies in these radical dimensions. But if they become more conservative and bureaucratic, they will lose their strength in their campaigns. And in my understanding, the Japanese people are don't concern about the political protest, or they are not ambitious in such a social cause. So I think it's very difficult for NGOs to be radical in this kind of society. And also, in my country, in China, the international NGOs are restricted by the government, and some organizations are also directly linked to the Chinese police. They cannot make some demonstrations or protests, and this is prohibited in China. So, to take different contexts of different countries, the international environmental NGOs face big challenges for their agenda, their strategies, and as I said in the conclusion, Did that make sense for the question?
The point I made was not the reaction of the Japanese government or mass media, but if the international NGO wanted to persuade Japanese people, it's better to just announce the kind of campaign that the eating whales is very dangerous, rather than just protesting radical movement or whatever it is. Why did they not do in that way? That was my question. Because if they seriously want to stop hunting whales, I think it's better to persuade the Japanese people in that way, because the Japanese people are very keen to the safetyness of the food or this kind of thing. So I'm just very wondering why they did not do it that way.
Good advice.
I'd say it's also a point that whether the meat is dangerous or not is still under controversy. And if the government and if the NGO community announces that eating meat is dangerous, it kill you to death, then the people will, the public will think that it's just their strategy, not the truth. So I think the most fundamental problem is the public's trust to the NGO community. So if the NGO lose their legitimacy as the main theme of my presentation, and they will ruin their roots of their position and also threaten their survival. That's my point.
大丈夫です。今の質問について、私はこれの専門ではない、クジラ漁の専門ではないんですけど、外国の NGO は科学的に数が減っていることや水銀の蓄積量の危険性についても発表していると思います。ただおそらく科学的に見てゆっくりと蓄積された水銀は今もしかしたら人体に害がないかもしれないということや、日本の、量が基本的にはとっても、環境資源に害のないものを数も十分あるものを取っているという点でNGO の言い分が通らないので、もしかしたら過激なことをしているかもしれないと思います。ただですね、コンクルージョンの、ところで気になったのは各 NGO たちが法を破ったりバイオレーション暴力的な活動をするとオーディエンスから信頼されなくなるいう点について、私は太地町を知ってますか？和歌山県の太地町に行ったこともあるんですけど、むしろ私が不思議なのは法を破ったりそういうことをして SNS にアップして寄付金を募る、むしろ、そのような行動の方が支持される、オーディエンスに支持されて、そういうのをしなくなると寄付金が集まらないということの方がむしろ不思議というか、インターネット社会の新しい傾向なんじゃないかと思います。悪いことをすると信用がなくすというのは普通の社会、看板見える社会ならその通りなんですけど、むしろインターネット社会では過激なことをした方が支持がキープできるというのが新しい現象なんじゃないかと思いました。
Anything still have and then
Just for the comment. Actually, if you see the amount of the consumption of the raw meat among the Japanese people, it decreased even before the criticism against the whale industry. Criticism against the whale industry occurred in the 80s. And then my comment is that actually, without any criticism from the international society, the amount of the consumption has been decreasing. But what is interesting is that in the 21st, only in the 21st century, among the weakness of the strong criticism from the international society, the Japanese government, not the population itself, started to increase the consumption. So, I'm not quite sure about the discussion of the oil industry, but there should be a lot of political strategy and intention to protect the oil industry in the Japanese government. It's not the kind of the part of the Japanese culture or Japanese tradition or anything at all, but maybe you need to include such kind of the point of view of Japanese kind of the nationalist policy on that issue. This is my opinion.
Yeah, since we have time, I just have a little follow-up. I would always be careful with the term radical in the context of social movements. It's always been criticized because what is radical, anything can be radical if the government doesn't like it. So you have to, if you use a term like radical, you have to define it in a way that is independent of governmental evaluation of policy. For example, in your case, you described it as radical, but very much from the view of a government agency, where if you were to do that academically, and I'm not saying that's not possible, you would have to find a good argument for how that is independent of political considerations. That's sort of what my comment is.
Okay, thank you very much. Hi.